Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands, a podcast where we bridge the gap between academics and practical marketing. Every week, we sit down and go deep behind the science of some of America's most successful brands. I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shilton.
And today we're sitting with Uri Gneezy, professor of economics and strategy at University of California, San Diego, UCSD, and author of 2 books, The Y-Axis and Mixed Signals. Let's get into it. Uri, welcome to Behavioral Science for Brands. We're very, very excited to have you join us today. As we were talking about before the show started, Richard and I have made it our little mission to be on the hunt for finding the best applications of behavioral science and bring them to the world of marketing. And we're super excited for our conversation today. But before we start, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to give our listeners just a little background on you so they can learn a little bit more. You're the Epstein-Atkins Endowed Chair in Behavioral Economics at UCSD. You're the author of 2 influential books, The Y-Axis, which delves into the hidden motives behind our everyday decisions, and Mixed Signals, where you explore how incentives can sometimes backfire and how to design them more effectively. Beyond academia, you've collaborated with lots of organizations on how to apply behavioral insights in real-world settings, helping businesses, policymakers design better incentives and understand the nuances behind human motivation. We're thrilled to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Looking forward to this.
Wonderful. So our listeners love stories. Can you tell us, how did you become introduced to this whole field of psychology, motivation? How did you get introduced to behavioral science overall?
So for some reason, even as a kid, I try to understand, why do people do what they do, right? So I always looked for, what's their incentives? I didn't know that it's called incentives, but why do we do different things, right? So I have lots of examples as a kid that I looked and, it's very annoying when people are like that instead of just behaving normally. But I was lucky because that was my passion. And then I learned later on that it could actually be a way of life, right? I can make a living doing research on that, and they still find it exciting. So I'm a lucky guy.
When you were younger, looking at the world, is there one thing that you remember thinking back on and saying, I see this differently than most people? Can you think of a time where you saw the world differently than everybody else?
So as a kid growing up in Israel, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, right? That was my, my dream. And as in my dreams, I would shoot down enemy planes and save the day, right? Like Top Gun kind of thing. And then I started to think, why do they do what, why don't the pilot take off and risk their life and, try to do whatever they do? So one thing is clear now it's your country, right? You do it for that. But another one is shooting down enemy planes, right? That's what they want to do. That's really what motivates them. Their dreams is to shoot down enemy planes because that's what they have. And I remember reading a book, and there was a chapter about someone in the 6-Day War that they were about the Golanites. He saw 2 enemy planes, and then some other squadron asked him, do you see them? And he said, yes, they're going south, where they actually went north, and he chased them. He didn't want to share the prize, right? He really wanted to do it himself, right? So he was risking his life much more than he had to, just to be the one shooting down. And I understood that the incentive of this pilot is not just to save the country. It's also, on his deathbed, what he's going to think about is, I shot down 3 enemy airplanes or whatever, right? That's his identity, right? And that's kind of incentives that I think are really important. So if you think about, Richard is in London, think about, World War II over there, the pilots went out. That's what they thought about. So you put in another incentives that doesn't cost you anything, but, that's what you talk about, and that makes it, that makes it work. And that's an example of how incentives work, and we don't always understand them. But once we do, it can really help us design the organization. In this case, the Air Force. How do you do it? You make it such that you glorify the people who shoot down enemy planes, and you make it salient, and it works.
And maybe one of the one of the most things that resonates most for me in hearing that story is that the incentives can be shared. Lots of young Israeli youth wanted that same vision. It's not just one person's, but you can discover the shared vision.
And it doesn't cost any money, right? So first of all, it's not money. It's something else. It's identity. And so it's cheap and it works.
Fascinating. So we've both really admired the writings that you have done, the 2 books that we talked about in the opening. Your latest book is called Mixed Signals. Maybe you could give everybody who's listening a little bit of an overview of what do you mean by that, and tell us a little bit about the book.
Every one of us work for our living, right? If you take a class in a business school, like where I teach on incentives, you can have 2 types of class. One of them will be taught by a psychologist that will tell you, look, you're doing this. People go to work because they want fulfillment. They want to feel good about it. Take this with an economist, and that economist will tell you, no, they hate going to work. They just go to work because they have to pay the rent. Now, I go to work because I need to pay the rent, right? I need to earn money, but it's also my fulfillment, right? It's a combination of the two. These 2 opposing things came what's called crowding out, and they have some research that maybe we'll get to it later about it, that, if I'll pay you money, I'll crowd out the psychological. What I'm interested in, how paying money or giving incentives, again, doesn't have to be money, how this can actually reinforce your identity and reinforce the fact that you want to do the job. However, in many cases, in organization, the organization tells you the story, tells you, I don't know, Michael, you need... We care only about quality. We don't care about quantity. Quality, we care that our customers will be happy, everything is good. But then they pay you per performance, right? So they pay you per quantity. Right? So what are you going to conclude from that, right? I don't know. So when I give a talk about the book, I often start by asking people, are you good at your job? Richard, are you good at your job?
I would claim I am.
You would claim I am, right?
Whether other people do is a different matter.
But it took you 2 seconds, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird question, but so it's not clear what does it mean to be good at our job. In your case, I don't know, rating might be good, right? Or whatever it is. But in my case, I can talk about qualification, but it's more than that. I want to be good like what my boss thinks that I should do. And if she tells me that I should care about quality, I'll care about quality. But then she gives me an incentive to worry about quantity. That's probably what she really wants, right? So I'm going to give quantity, but I'm not going to do it as well as because it'll be faster, right? So I think, the simplest example is a call center. Imagine that you work in a call center and your boss tells you, care about quality, we don't want the customers to come back, but pays you per call. I'll pick up the phone, the person on the other side has a complicated issue. Next, right? I will not, the quality will be compromised, right? And there are many examples like that. So think about the team versus individual incentives. Your boss can tell you, look, you should work with other people. It's really important. It's really, try to, but then pay you based on your performance. Now, I'm not saying that it's bad to pay per performance, right? If you want to get the best people, they need to be compensated. They would not come if you have some, but make sure that your message is clear, right? Make sure that you can say, look, Michael, you're the star of this team. You're paid more, and everyone knows this, right? But still, I want you to try and work with other people. Or you can say, whatever it is that you want, make sure that the message is the same, right? Either the payment, not either, both the payment and the message are the same. And there are many examples like this, but the idea is that your incentive send a signal. Make sure that the signal is consistent with what you tell your people, and it could be your consumers, could be your kids, whatever.
You mentioned asking people to behave as a team, but then incentivizing them as individuals. You've got a great example in Mixed Signals about soccer players. I think Manchester United, where that goes disastrously wrong. Could you talk us through that?
Right. So I'm not going to get myself into Manchester United. That's a part of my. But you have a guy that is really good at scoring goals. You get him to the team and you pay him, say, I don't know, $1 million per goal that he scores. Right. That's great.
Yeah.
But now as a team, what you care is not about this guy, I don't know, Messi, right? It's not about this guy scoring goal. You as a coach, you as a manager, what you care about is the team winning, the team scoring the goal. Right? And in many cases, it would be better, few people are running, few players are running towards the goal. And it would be much better if you'll pass it. But now if you'll pass it, maybe there is a higher chance of scoring, but definitely a lower chance of him getting his bonus. So he will try and go in himself, may score, may not, but the probability of success is lower. But the overall, if he's successful, he'll get $1 million. That's what he'll do instead of passing, right? So that's an example where incentives are not great.
So if you have our listeners who are CMOs of brands, owners of brands, maybe MBA students who now are in charge of marketing, is okay. So far, so good. I get that I need to align my incentive with the messaging. Where would you take it from there, Uri? Like, what would you tell them if they buy into that concept? What else is important for them to know?
Well, so first of all, they need to understand what's their message, right? In many cases, they don't align it because they don't think about it. They don't stop and think, what is it that I want my employees to do? What is it that I want my customers to understand with the discount that I give? Right? So first of all, understand it yourself. But then, strategically, what do you want to do? Now, one of the things that I talk about in the book, in If I Had Energy, it's not going to happen, but if I had energy, I would write a book called The Common Sense Officer. Right? So you have CEO, CFO, CMO, whatever, but all these companies don't have a common sense officer. That's just put a normal person over there, not an MBA, someone smart, right? Kidding. Someone that will tell them, look, this is just a bad idea. Don't do that. Right? Don't do that. I have lots of examples of that, companies that just did it, that did things that if they had someone with common sense would tell them, hold on, maybe that's not the best idea, right? So do that. The second important thing is to be humble in thinking that how incentives are going to work. I do it for a living for many, many years. I'm often very, very surprised by the results. What you need to do also is A/B testing, right? So you need to go, that's the y-axis that you mentioned before, the book with John List from 10 years ago. Basically, it's called field experiments. It's a fancy word for A/B test. You would never go and put, so I work with engineers. Before they release a printer, they test it like millions of times in the lab, and then they test it another 10 million times with a subsample of, only then they release the printer. But incentive, poof, some board sits and says, let's do that. It doesn't work this way. In many cases, people, for example, learn very fast how to game the system. Right? People are really, really clever at gaming the system. People may be insulted by your incentive. People think that the incentive, there could be many things that happen. So try to use all the good stuff that we talk about. So, loss aversion, regret, and all the good stuff. Try to apply it. But then don't think that you got it right the first time. Right? Test it, get feedback. And by the way, it's a dynamic process because it might work now, but things may change. I don't know, the president changed, whatever. Your customers learn how to game what you do. You have different types of customers now. Make sure that you keep testing different approaches. So don't think that, I can sit down. And that's a very annoying thing when I talk with, companies and hospitals and everything. We tried incentives and it didn't work. It's like saying, I went to a Japanese restaurant and it was bad. Well, maybe you went to a bad Japanese restaurant. It doesn't mean the Japanese food is bad, right? It means that the one you tested, you sampled, you were unlucky. The same is true with incentives. Don't tell me incentives don't work. Incentives work. The only thing that annoys me, I think, professionally, is people telling me incentives don't work. They do work. What you tried didn't work, which is fine. Or maybe they work in a way that we don't understand, but the incentives do work.
I think my single favorite moment for the book, and there were lots of them, was in the chapter around lack of humility, where people have put incentives in place thinking they could work very simply, and they're being surprised by the backfire effect. And the one that made me smile most was the one about Robert of Naples and the tax he put in place that led to the Truly buildings. Could you talk through what happened there?
Sure. So in Puglia, which is the hue of the booth in Italy, a beautiful place, amazing food, they have this very strange structure. So it's like, looks like that, and then it has a roof that looks like that, very steep, which the particular thing about it, you don't find it anywhere else, is that people that know what they're doing can take it off in a couple of hours and put it back in a couple of hours. Why did they do it? Puglia was, very far away, but the king of Naples used to send tax collectors from time to time. Whenever they found out that the tax collector is coming, they knew if the structure has a roof, they have to pay lots of taxes because then it's home. If it doesn't have a roof, then it's shul. The word would spread that the tax collector is in town. Everyone would take off the roofs. The tax collector would come and they put it back, right? Italians are really good at talking about gaming the system. Italians are good at it, and they were good at it a few hundred years ago as well.
Yeah, I just love this idea that people hate tax so much that they're prepared to collapse their roof rather than hand over, a florin or whatever it was in those days.
I have lots of examples. You're in London now, right? So there used to be, ships living from, I don't think that it was in the book because it's too, I know it's a bit of a sad story, but you English, you used to send your bad people to Australia. So at the beginning, they used to put them on the boat, pay the captain per person they put on the boat, and then, I don't know, a huge percentage of them would not reach Australia, would reach Australia dead. So even for your countrymen at the time, it was too much. They changed the incentives. Instead of paying the captain per person that goes on board, they pay them per person that actually arrived to Australia. Huge change, right? Archaeologists in China 100 years ago wanted to get fossils. Right? So they paid the farmers to collect them. They paid them per piece. So they would find a big one and just smash it to small pieces. And lots of examples like that I think are really fun.
So we have...
Sorry, that's a good example that incentives work, but not necessarily the way we thought.
In the way that you want, yeah.
Since we're on this topic of planning incentives, trying to match the message and the incentive, putting it in market, and then realizing it was not the plan, you're not getting the results you wanted. Do you have any guidance for business leaders, marketers specifically, of how to listen for the outcome? I mean, how do they know if they're not getting the incentives they want, or how can they? Meaning, what are good things that they should be on the lookout for to know if they are getting that 100 pieces smashed instead of one actual archaeological piece?
So first of all, if you would think about it, you would have maybe reached the conclusion yourself, or at least look at the data immediately when it shows up. If you start seeing small pieces, stop it immediately, right? So that's the A/B testing part of it. And it's also, by the way, even if your incentives work, it doesn't mean that you're optimizing. You might be able to get more out of that. I worked with the company that did some ads for cars. You would go on their website, you get some information about Toyota Corolla, and then you'd say, okay, I'm ready to buy. You put in your zip code. They wanted people to go from their website to the dealer's website. So they gave them $200 discount, and it worked. I mean, if you purchase the car through them, you got $200 discount. That worked. But, $200 out of a $20,000 car, $200 is a lot of money, but out of 20, you don't think about it in this. So it worked, but we thought that you can make it better. What we did is said, look, what is really painful for people? Paying for gas related to cars. Paying for gas is very painful. Now, $200 for gas, that's a lot of money. I can fill it up a couple of times, and each time I'll feel, well, I got a good deal, right? So we changed, instead of $200, we gave you the same credit card. We sent you the same debit card, but this time we said for gas, just renamed it. That worked much better than the $200 cash, right? Because $200 is 1% of 20,000. $200 in gas, that's few weeks of fueling. Just renaming it.
That's an amazing study. Lots of practical implications. When you're trying to unpick why it was so successful, do you put it down to the fact that paying for gas is painful? Paying for gas, £200 will cover it will cover 3 or 4 visits, where it's a tiny percentage of the 20,000? Or is cash just too abstract, whereas a trip to the gas station is very concrete and visualizable?
It's a combination of everything. So it's called in our literature, it's called mental accounting, right? So mental accounting basically means that money is not fungible. It should be fungible, right? So it should be, I don't care how I earned this $10. I should treat it the same. But $10 that I'll earn, you say that at the end, you'll say, wow, you did a great job. We'll send you $10. That would be one type of $10. And it's going to be different than $10 that I'll find in the street. If I find it on the street, I'm more likely to buy some fun stuff with it. If I worked very hard and suffered like here, I treat it differently, right? So the $10 have different meaning, which is mental accounting, based on mental accounting. Our brain really categorizes stuff. So I have stuff for going to restaurants and I have stuff for paying the bills. And it's not the same. I don't treat it as the same money. Now, if the overarching rule is look for something that people really have pain. So it could be you go to a restaurant. Here's an example. You go to a restaurant and I don't have a problem buying a glass of wine for $20. I hate paying $20 for parking. That's really painful for me, right? So if you want to give me a discount, don't give me a glass of wine. Give me free parking, right? That's the kind of things that you should think about. What is it that, with the same amount, we can get rid of something that people really hate? I go to the airport sometimes with few luggages. Here in San Diego, we have to pay $5 for the trolley, for like a minute of the trolley. That's really annoying. Really, really annoying. I think that they're taking advantage of me. It should be free, so I don't do it. And I go like a minute. Then I go to Starbucks and the coffee over there costs $12, right? It's at the airport, right? It's really crazy, but I don't care. So that's, just make sure that you target something that people really hate paying for.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely question that marketers can pose themselves. And what is it in your setup that people hate? And then think about using that as the incentive. So maybe shipping could be one thing. I'm always aggravated by shipping.
Yes. Free shipping could be a great thing. If I don't like paying for shipping or tax or whatever it is, make sure that you're doing it. Shipping, by the way, is an example where you can do the opposite. I can offer you a free return. If you buy it, you can return it within 30 days. But then I charge you enormous amount for shipping, because the shipping will be, you will not get the money back. Right, so that's another form of mental accounting in which you pay $100 for the item that you bought and $20 for shipping, and you can return it whenever you want. So you pay the $120 altogether. Now, if you return it, you get back only $100. So that's also something that some companies do.
That's interesting. One of the chapters in the book talks about how price signals quality. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because it connects to this concept that we're talking about.
So we had this experiment in which we went to a winery near San Diego, and the guy wanted to know how to price his wines, the wine owner. So there, we've all been to wine tasting, I guess, right? You go there, you get a list, a printed page with the list. Usually it starts with the light whites, and you go to the heavier red, right? And you pick, say, 4 wines to drink, and then you decide whether to taste and you decide whether to buy. And the first thing that we did was with this, he had the Cabernet Sauvignon that he was interested in selling. We doubled the price. So I don't remember, instead of $10, it was $20. And what we saw, that actually more people bought it after tasting it, right? And the idea is that I don't know what's the quality of the wine. You tell me that it's a $20 wine, it must be a good wine, and I'm here at the winery, I might as well get a good wine. Right, so think about, say that usually you drink a $20 bottle of wine. Now you're celebrating something. You go and ask the store, can I get, I'm looking for a $50 bottle of wine, because we associate price with quality. Right, and in many cases in negotiation, I teach negotiation here in San Diego. We say that the asking price, if you make it high enough, one of the things that you get is that the perception of the other side will be that what you're selling is actually good. Right, so that's the idea, and that works over there, right? So when we start with a high price, we get the other side to think, well, that must be a good product if is charging lots of money. Right? In some cases, it's not going to work, right? So there are things that I know their price and you won't fool me, or I know the quality precisely. But in cases, so the Peloton was a good example. There is a quote from the CEO of Peloton that said, look, we introduced the bike, back when they started, and we wanted people to buy it, so we offered the discount. We sold it for, $800. People said, well, $800 can't be really good. We doubled the price, and then suddenly it was high-quality bike that everyone wanted to get into, right? So that's a great example, I think.
And can companies kind of get the best of both worlds? So obviously, someone's disposable cash comes into it, and there'll be occasions where they just can't afford a very high-priced item. But if a company had to say 2 items, it adds on a super premium one, no one ever buys it, will that spill over into quality perceptions of the other items? Does it have this kind of halo effect?
So you go to restaurants very often and you see, the $20,000 bottle of wine. I really want to ask the waiter, you know what? Today we're celebrating. Can I get the whatever Chateau de la something from 1985? Right? And they probably don't have it on the menu, right? But like you said, you look at the wine list and you see, wow, they have up to $15,000, $20,000 bottle of wine. They must know what they're doing, right? So it signals something that signals the quality, how deep your wine list is and the quality. So in other cases, it could be some kind of price discrimination, right? So you can have people that can pay lots of money and just want the best, right? So you have people that enter the restaurant and give me your best champagne. We also eat in movies, right? And most people go and want an affordable champagne, right? So you have one for this and one for that.
Those are lovely commercial examples, but I know you also do an awful lot of work with charities. One of the studies that I found fascinating was where you talked about overhead aversion. Thought that was something that would be lovely to discuss. I think quite a few listeners might be able to apply that principle. Could you take us through that study?
Sure, I love that stuff. So let me start by a setup. In many cases, people who work in charities don't get paid a lot, right? So the probability that you'll fly business going on a 12-hour flight if you work for a bank versus charity, we know which one is more likely to fly you. And in many cases, the right choice is actually to fly your business, because if you go for 2 days over there, if you fly business, you'll be functional. If not, you're not. I ask my students, say that Michael is an MBA student and Richard is an MBA student. Michael went to work as a financial advisor, and now he's making $5 million a year. 10 years out, he's making $5 million a year, and they are all, salivating. That's what I want to be. I want to be Michael when I grow. Then I tell them, Richard went to work for a charity. He's making $5 million a year. They are all, that's not right. That's bad, right? So the people that, who is a better person, without telling them the salary, they'll say, Richard is better than Michael. He's working for charity, right? But if Richard will get paid a lot of money, they will be upset, right? So for some reason, we don't want to pay a charity organization, charity people, lots of money. We don't want them to fly business. We don't want them to have nice offices because we think that that's wasteful. Or how can we get the best people to work over there? So imagine that you have these 2 options. You can grow up to be the Michael example or the Richard example. It might be better to be the Michael example and give $1 million to charity. If you're so much into charity, just give some of your money to charity and you've done better to the world, right? And it's very hard for them to, first of all, get the best people. They have people that are devoted, but sometimes, they could have done better. They lose people. They don't have the infrastructure that they want and many of these things. And the reason is that when we give money to charity, we want our money to go to so if I want to give money to kids, say, whatever, in Liverpool, I want all the money to go to these kids. Right? I don't want Richard to fly business with that money. Right? So that's the overhead, right? I don't want to pay overhead. And that's something that really hurts me. Now, the question that we asked, okay, I don't want to pay over it, but you can think about big picture, you can think about two things. I just don't like organizations that have lots of overhead because I think they're not efficient or even corrupt, and I just don't. Or myself, I don't want to pay for the overhead. So we ran an experiment in which we had the same company, right? So the story was about the same company. You had to choose where to give the money. In one case, so compared two companies, in one case, the company A and company B did not have overhead. Most of the people chose company A, charity A. Then we say charity A has 40% overhead. Everyone wanted to give their money to charity B. And then we said that the most important one was charity A has 40% overhead, but someone else already paid for it. Your money is going to go directly to the customer. They love that, right? So if you have a high overhead, but you're not the one paying it, if the charity has it, someone pays it, that's really great. And the implication is, if you're talking with someone like me that can give you $100, don't bother. Just try to get me something without overhead. But if you go to someone that can give $10 million, try to convince them, look, you can pay for another wing at the hospital, or you can pay, because some of the money can go towards overhead, such that we can offer the Uri of the world that can give $100, we can offer them overhead free donation. And we found, and follow-up also found that could be really helpful, right? So if you go to people, if I have $10 million, I have people also that will go into this and will look at it and will check. Convince these people, look, pay for the overhead, pay for the organization, make sure that we have the best computer system that can actually get, we can purchase the data that we need, whatever. And then go to the smaller donors and just tell, we got a very generous donation that pays for it. Every dollar that you give will go to the child that you want. So if you pay for lunches for kids in San Diego that need it in schools, every dollar that you give, I can tell you how many meals it gives without anything at the end. And if I start explaining to you, look, we want to get the meal to the schools in schools, but we need a truck. We need a truck driver. We need to pay for gas. I don't want to hear this. Don't tell me how much, how 50% goes just for the truck. I don't want to pay for a truck. I want to think about the kid that eats lunch today because I gave the money.
And thinking about marketers who are listening to this and saying, "Oh, I can see how it applies, like how I can use this for my business and brands." Would you say that the way that you discovered the tension for people about not wanting to pay for overhead was, again, back to the beginning of our conversation, listening to the motivations and the incentives? Or how would you guide folks to think about how to uncover the true hidden tension that exists for them?
So one of the nice things about being in academia is that we have a very long horizon, right? So if I talk with someone now about a paper, it will be published in 5 years. People in the real world don't have this. If you go back to your day job and say, well, thank you for asking the question. It's really interesting. I'll be back to you in, October 2028. I can do that, right? So we could sit and think, look, this overhead really kills companies, right? So we can look at it. There are examples. Why does it happen? And then, thinking about it, try to analyze, and look, we can think about two reasons, right? These two reasons, and say, okay, how can we distinguish between these two reasons that I mentioned, right? I just don't like companies with overhead, or I don't like to pay it myself. It sounds very simple, but it takes time. This process takes time, and you make lots of errors, but then at the end, so a good design, a good experimental design, a good understanding of the world is very, very simple in retrospect, right? I'm not doing physics, right? I don't need to write long math equations. A good design, something that is really smart. If you look at the contribution of behavioral science, there are things that after some, no, that's clear. That's how we should do it. It takes time, right? And one of the advantages of being academic is that you can spend lots of time thinking about this. I walk on the beach here in San Diego and think about stuff, and talk with my colleagues, and together we come up with things, right? But I think that even if you work with the speed of the real world, in which you need to find a solution within days, thinking about it a bit more is always good, right? And don't be satisfied. One of the things I'm trying to don't be satisfied with what you found, even if it works. Try to think about whether you can make it better.
I think that's very helpful to hear you go through, and I think it doubles down on this concept that whatever we have today should be the worst version of what we can have. We can always make it better. We can always improve it. In our latest book, Uri, Hacking the Human Mind, Richard and I have been working on for 2 years. It's coming out later this year. Thank you. We covered your research into regret lotteries. And to us, this was really insightful and really helpful for brand marketers to think about how they can use this. Can you tell listeners a little bit about the work you did with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and about regret lotteries?
Sure. Let me start with regret in general. So we're talking about, stories as a kid, right? So my grandpa came to Israel in 1947, 48. And he wasn't a rich person, but he bought a lottery ticket, the state lottery. I think it was 7 numbers at the time, 7 digits. I don't know, from 1 to 40. I don't remember the details, right? He had the same 7 numbers for 40 years until he passed away. If you go on vacation, he would ask someone to buy these numbers, right? So he was sure. And he wasn't a gambling person, or that was his thing. Now, why couldn't he stop? Because imagine that you stop, you go on vacation, you go to away for a week and these numbers come, right? And the regret is huge. Some companies actually make money designing lotteries like this. So in the most famous one, I think, is the postcode lottery in the Netherlands. Postcode is a zip code. Zip code is like 5 houses over there. Now imagine that Michael and Richard, you are neighbors in the same zip code. One of you is smart and doesn't buy the lottery, and the other one is stupid and buys the lottery. And then you listen and you hear on the TV that your zip code came up. Now, the smart person is going to be really, really upset. And if that smart person is also married or has, relationship with another person, that person will have lots of explanation. And that person will be very happy. Now, anticipating this, so one of the things that they give to make it worse, they give you a brand new BMW. Each time you go in the morning to work, you'll see you're going to your Toyota, and your stupid neighbor, will drive a fancy BMW, right? So the regret that you anticipate having is really going to cause you to actually buy the ticket. That's the lottery ticket in this example, right? So, by the way, the work with the Bill and Melinda Gates, I did not do. I wanted to do it.
Oh,
they didn't want me to do it, unfortunately. But if someone else wants to do it, think about parking, right? Imagine that you work in Bill and Melinda Gates or, HP or something like that. There is a parking lot. 1,000 people work over there. There's a parking lot for 500 cars. And in general, so the Bill and Melinda Gates was interesting because Seattle was worried when they built the new campus that too many people will use their private cars instead of public transportation. So, yeah, what you can do, it's not what they did because they didn't do this version. They did something, but not merely, let's say, with fantasy. Fantasy is always more exciting. So you can pay people, you can charge people for parking. They are not. It's going to work, right? If I'll charge you $50 a day for parking, you won't come. But that's not what your employees will like, right? You don't want your employees to be upset. What they decided, and many other companies decided, is look, every day that you don't come, we'll give you, I don't know, $5, right? So then they had, you can do this. Now imagine that instead of that, at the end of the week, 5 days times $5, that's $25. 1,000 people, that's $25,000. At the end of the week, you're going to pull up a name by chance. Out of the 1,000 employees, we pull up a name. Richard, oh, but you parked this week. Sorry. Let's pull another one. Michael, you didn't. Here's $25,000, right? that would be Richard would think twice before coming with the car next time. Right? So anticipating this regret, and you can, if you do this as a public lottery, you can make it a fun, everyone is around whatever, that you can really get to much more. Basically, the idea is that you anticipate a regret and you're doing stuff in order to prevent. You understand, regret is one of the strongest negative emotions that we can have. In a company that design its incentives right, it could be very annoying. I'm not saying that you should do it, but, the zip code lottery, for example, I think is a really, really ugly thing to do, right? I don't think that it should be done, but it works, right? So, and that's, by the way, a side note on this. People often ask me, about incentives that, it could be used for bad things, of course, right? So you can use incentives to sell cigarettes to get 10-year-old kids addicted to cigarettes, or you can use incentives to get people to stop smoking, right? So it's a tool. It's not something good or bad in itself. The zip code lotteries, I think, is a bad use in the sense that it gets people something that they don't want.
And there's kind of different ways of looking at it as well. So you've got in the regret lottery with the companies, and not, forget Dutch postcode lottery for a while, but even within an organization, in the short term, a regret lottery is going to be very effective because of that regret and that negative emotion. I guess sometimes it might be hard to actually apply it because you worry people will be so annoyed. I've encouraged them to stop parking, but now I've got loads of...
Right. Imagine that I need to take my kids to school in the morning, so I cannot take public transportation. And you have this story. I'll be upset with you. Why are you discriminating against people with kids? And, you can think about lots of examples like that. So what's your book going to be about? My turn to ask questions.
So we, in this podcast, we really become attuned to looking at successful companies and then revealing the behavioral science that we can observe, revealing the biases they either recognize and activate against, or things that maybe they didn't even know they were doing, but we can see has been part of their success. So 17 different companies, all of them we wrote a chapter each on, and we reveal some of the most prevalent behavioral science biases behind them. And Richard, we've been on this, Han. It was a discovery of, sometimes we think they knew what they were doing, and a lot of times I think we were explaining why some of the things that they were doing really worked.
But they were lucky to stumble on something that worked, right?
Or they had human intuition that got them that answer, even if they didn't have the academic backing of why.
Right. They didn't know how to call it. They didn't know that it's called mental accounting, but they used mental accounting. Right. That's great.
So for example, one of the studies we talk about is this lovely study from Elliot Aronson at Harvard, 1966, called the Pratfall effect, where he shows that people or products are more appealing if they exhibit a small flaw. He did that in 1966, but there was an amazing creative director at Rady School, DDB, Bill Bernbach, who in 1959 came up with the line, "Ugly as only skin deep" for VW. In 1962, one of his team came up with the line, "We're number two, so we try harder." And he wasn't just, these weren't random. He said a small admission gains a large acceptance. So it's one of those fascinating examples where someone who had never, had a psychological background or an academic background, he'd observed human behavior and noticed the power of being very open about a problem. And that came like 7 years before the research showed that this wasn't just a empty speculative claim. There was actual data. Yeah.
I have in mind, Don Draper in Mad Men, coming up this, that's great. Actually, it's interesting because successful companies, when I consult, usually the successful companies are the ones that benefit more. So if your company is failing, you are already kicking and, you're trying to do everything you can in order to make it work. But if your company works, then you say, okay, everything works, don't change it. And there are many examples, Blockbuster and, Kodak and, lots of others that just didn't understand that the fact that it works now, it's not necessarily going to work forever, and you can improve. looking forward to reading your success stories.
Thank you very much. So because we have this interest in marketing, can you think of any biggest mistakes you've seen marketers make when it's come to incentives? Is there any examples, Uri, of like where you felt marketers use incentives, but maybe not the right way?
So in many cases, marketers give incentives and you talk with the people later and they don't even realize that they got the incentives. Right. So, and there are many examples of that. That's clearly bad. If your customers don't understand that you gave them incentives, that's not the case. Another example is, and on that I can give you millions of examples. Think about Singapore. In Singapore, they have good public transportation, but it's very crowded. Good train system, but it's very crowded. So they wanted people to come before 7:45 a.m. So they devoted $10 million to make it free before 7:45. It worked in the sense that 10% more people actually shifted from after to before. Now, is that a success? Yes. But think about it. You gave $10 million. You gave out of this 90% of it. So $9 million went to people that would have ride the train before 7:45 a.m. anyway. Only $1 million went to the targeted audience. That's not what you want to do. It's like going to a company and saying, okay, we're going to give you everyone, we're going to test you, and everyone who doesn't smoke will get $1,000. That's great, but if only 5% of your people are smoking, that's not targeting the right people. Now, there is some fairness issue for this, right? So if I take the company's budget and give it to people that behave badly, like smoking or don't exercise or overweight, and that they want to change, the skinny people, the annoying people that don't have bad habits will be insulted by that, right? Will think that it's unfair. So you need to find a way to do it in a smart way. But if you want to get people to ride the train earlier, target the people that ride it later. If you want to use smoking cessation incentives, give it to people that actually smoke. And find a way to compensate the other people such that they will not be upset with you.
That would be at the core of all base marketing knowledge, is make sure you're targeting the right audience. And then, and to your point.
Well, you just summarized everything we said, right? All the principles that we know from marketing, for some reason, when it gets to incentives, we don't do it. Target the right people, use what they want, try to find out what they want, try to see whether it works. So, focus group is one thing, but, do A/B testing. All the things that you do when you launch your product, do it here as well with incentives.
Yeah, because the obvious business example where there's that problem that you've got at Singapore is, let's say a company gives away a $10 discount. They give it away far too regularly to people who are going to buy anyway. And I think some of this comes down to poor measurement. It's very easy to see the redemption of the discounts. What's hard to see is, well, were those people going to buy anyway?
Or the marginal customer that you got, right? So with Singapore, if you're a public policy person, you can say, well, we increased the number of people that ride it by 10%. We are happy with this. You should be happy. It's not a bad outcome, but think about it, right? Can you do better?
Yeah.
Right. So exactly what you said. You gave a discount. See people that are actually coming with the discount. You see an increase. But you don't think about people that would have bought it anyway and are not trying, right? How can I give you incentives to switch from another brand? I'm trying to sell you toilet paper. How do I get you to switch? I don't, right? And I don't want to annoy my customers. Early on, Amazon had this very early on. So we're talking 20 years ago. They know everything about you, right? So say that the two of you are buying books. Richard, you go and just buy on Amazon because you have cost of time. Michael, you go and search before, right? So price discrimination would mean that Amazon should offer Michael better deals. Problem was that, two students sit in a class and one of them says, I bought it for $20. The other one said, oh, really? I got it for $17. And, that's very annoying, right? But that was their idea. This kind of price discrimination saying, look, if you're a regular buyer, we don't want to give you a discount. We want to get the people that shop around, the people that are not our customers. And there are ways to do it, but it's you have to be careful.
This was a great conversation, Uri. Really interesting. We covered really important topics for our listeners. before we say thank you, any final thought on maybe your favorite application of behavioral science in the world? Something that you just, when you think about it, you say, this is just, I love to think about this. I love to share this. Something that you think would be helpful for people as they come to the end of the episode.
So how to incentivize yourself, that's a great thing, right? So for me, for example, I try to walk a certain amount of steps every day, and I have my app for this. And if I don't reach my goal, I will keep walking. And I will not walk if I don't have my phone with me. I mean, no way. I will not waste steps on, right? Example of, gamification. You want to be on the elliptical machine, allow yourself to watch Netflix only when you're on the elliptical machine, right? So think about ways to incentivize yourself. That's, I think, the most fun, right? And that's a very good way of thinking about incentives. Well, what would make me actually be better, right? Because, like I said, we all have bad habits. We all prefer to sit on the couch and, drink and eat instead of exercise. Not all, but most of us, many of us, right? How can we get us to go? I think that your insight, basically everything that you do with marketing with a new product, think about incentives the same way. Who do I market this to? How do I make it more attractive? How do I test this? If that's the takeaway, I think that's a good takeaway.
Thank you very much for being with us today. For everyone who's listening, we will take the examples and the studies that Uri mentioned, put them in the show notes. You can find the show notes and the transcript of today's conversation at theconsumerbehaviorlab.com. And you can stream this podcast anywhere where you listen to podcasts. Until next time, I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Schultz.
Thank you, Uri, for being with us today. Such a pleasure.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it.
Behavioral Science for Brands is brought to you by Method One. Recognized as one of the fastest growing companies in America for the third year in a row, featured on Inc.'s 5,000 list. Method One is a proudly independent creative and media agency grounded in behavioral science. They exist to make brands irresistible, helping people discover products, services, and experiences that bring moments of joy to their lives. As behavior change experts, Method One creates emotional connections that drive true brand value for their clients, focusing primarily with indulgence brands in the CPG space. Find out more at methodone.com.